Welcome to the Play Their Way podcast, where we talk about all things in child first coaching. I'm your host, Laura Jane Jones, and today we've got two for the price of one. I'm delighted to say I'm joined by two of the UK's UNICEF's Youth Advisory Board, Poppy and Sam. Hello both, and thanks for joining us. How are you?
Hello, thank you for having us. I'm doing really well, thank you. How are you?
Very well, Poppy. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Brilliant. Well, the UK UNICEF Youth Advisory Board has existed since 2019. It exists as a voice for children's rights, to provide insight on children's matters and to help raise awareness. So normally, girls, I sit with a list of questions when we do this podcast, but today I've got more of a blank canvas because this is literally what Play Their Way is about. It's about giving young people a voice, and we want to hear yours. So let's start with you both telling me a little bit about how you got involved. So Sam, I'll start with you. How did you end up on the UK's UNICEF Youth Advisory Board?
Great. So I originally found the application to join the UNICEF Youth Advisory Board online, and I hadn't previously been on any of the youth advisory boards, but all I knew is that I was really passionate about children's rights, and I'd done a bunch of volunteering during my secondary school time. So having seen this, I thought it was like a great opportunity, and I wasn't even certain whether I'd get in or not. But I was like, it's worth applying, so I applied online, and yeah, luckily I got in, and it's been amazing ever since.
Poppy, how did you get involved?
So I first heard about it through UNICEF UK's initiative Rights Respecting Schools, which is an initiative that works within schools to make sure that the school community, both teachers and pupils and parents and carers, are all working together to have a very rights respecting community. And through that, I was recommended by one of the teachers that helps organise the group within our Rights Respecting School to apply for the opportunity. And I haven't looked back since. It was an amazing opportunity. And I've got up to so many different life-changing opportunities within this that I'm beyond grateful for.
What sparked an interest in children's rights in both of you? Obviously, we're all kids at one point, so we're all kind of interested in our own rights. But what was it specifically that got you engaged in a programme like this?
I would say, from my perspective, it was kind of seeing how rights played a role in my day-to-day life, as well as many other young people across the nation. So I particularly was passionate about mental health, and I still am. And I was part of the head girl team in my secondary school. So we started creating this podcast actually on mental health in our school. And we found out that through a lot of our voices were really pivotal to starting this podcast and to involving other young people into the discussion. So I think really acknowledging how much of an impact it was to come from young people who were experiencing things or had a lived experience was really important to these conversations. So having acknowledged like the power of our voice and the power of getting together as young people and starting an initiative and wanting to create a change was something that really motivated me, and I felt that UNICEF was the perfect organisation to join.
Poppy, you mentioned school. Was that the nucleus of where it came from for you?
I would say personally for me, school was definitely a place that empowered and sparked that interest, but it was also through different organisations within Scotland. So I took part in Young Scots Health panel, which focused both on mental and physical health. And through that, I realised that youth voice within that sector was so important in both making sure that young people were safe and felt part of a community, but also so that those that are helping the young people themselves, so like coaches and parents, were able to be there every step of the way to support them meaningfully. And through that, when I saw the opportunity to be a part of the Youth Advisory Board, it was really ideal to go for that so that I could help make sure that my voice and my experience through being a youth coach myself and through having experience being excluded due to injuries and due to being in a wheelchair for when I was younger, that opportunity to be able to make sure that young people felt included and safe within those environments was so vital, and one that I am forever grateful for.
Through the work of the Youth Advisory Board, do you genuinely feel listened to? I know that oftentimes as young people we can be told that, oh, come and get involved in this, but it doesn't necessarily carry through to anything tangible and real life. Do you both feel genuinely listened to through this Youth Advisory Board?
For me personally, definitely, because we both help internally within UNICEF to make sure youth voice is at the very heart of UNICEF UK's work, but we also work externally to make sure that our voices are heard and those close to us and young people from across the UK are heard and listened to. And not only are they listened to, but their voices are valued and taken into different sectors and made sure that they are a fundamental and core value of different programs and initiatives that are created off of that voice.
Sam, how empowered do you feel by that?
Honestly, I feel very empowered. I think a concern for a lot of other youth boards and youth organisations is whether youth voice will be tokenistic. But I'm very fortunate in saying that I haven't found that experience at all in the youth advisory board, because one, we are actively a part of UNICEF. Like, we don't feel like an add-on for purely commercial reasons. But I think essentially we are in meetings, we're at the discussion. We're not just sitting at the table, but we're leading the discussion. And what I mean by that is that we have loads of meetings throughout the year at the UNICEF office in London. And it's just, we're really incorporated. Like, we even had a UNICEF CEO takeover day, which was great, on World Children's Day last year, which was just invaluable to really make charge of these opportunities and take charge of discussion. So I would say I'm 100% empowered.
As young people who are being listened to in this space by UNICEF, do you get frustrated when you realise that in other places that isn't always the case? How much of the rest of the world and different organisations got to go to make young people feel listened to?
I would say at times it can feel frustrating, but it's also a room for opportunity and a room for improvement. So I see it more as a hopeful sign that we can help by showing and showcasing the amazing work that UNICEF UK does to value youth voice, that inspires and empowers other organisations to see how valuable and so how well it works within UNICEF, how that they can then apply that within their organisations to make sure that youth voice isn't tokenistic and is very much valued within their organisation. And I think through that, the kind of almost echoing and kind of being inspired by what UNICEF does, it also means that young people, if they see that that isn't happening within their organisation, they're able to look at what UNICEF is doing and try and advocate and fight for that change within their area of work.
Do you feel, you've talked about other young people seeing what's going on at UNICEF, do you girls feel like, as advocates for young people, that you're set an example? How much do you feel like other young people can look at what you're doing at UNICEF and start to self-advocate?
I believe that there's a lot of opportunity for that. So a lot of us are really connected with our local communities. And for example, in the summer, I did a few sessions with my local community and with my secondary school in terms of how to get involved in youth activism or how to get involved with UNICEF, etc. And yeah, I think just the fact that UNICEF, the Youth Advisory Board, is such an accessible, inclusive youth board, really means a lot for representation, but also means that you see other people like you who are in these like meetings and who are leading these discussions. I think is really empowering, and something that year 8 to me would have really looked up to and been like, oh wow, like there's a youth board that I'm actually going to be valued to be in. So I think that's really that.
Poppy, Sam mentioned that she already had an interest and a passion for mental health before getting involved with the youth board. But what's something that you had a passion about before joining it that you've been able to bring through and perhaps shine a light on through the charity?
Yeah, I think for me personally, I had a very diverse and wide range of interests, and mental health was one of them. But for me personally, one of the major core values was education. It's something that, especially within Scotland, you've got rural parts and you've got more urban areas, and sometimes that education isn't as equally prominent. So it was so key to my work to make sure that education was seen as something that doesn't always come through a classroom, but can instead be done through social media, can be done through peer-to-peer learning, and it's trying to shine a light on that and make sure that young people feel empowered by education and feel that they can help educate others within their community, maybe on different cultural beliefs, or also on different things that inspire them, so they can educate other young people on how to look after their mental health, how to look after their physical health. And a huge part of coaching is by educating young people through play, which is such a key part of that. And it's really amazing to see that happen within local communities.
Sam, what's something that you perhaps didn't have an interest in beforehand, but through the Youth Advisory Board you've now become more passionate about?
I would say probably the impact of like policy making and how that kind of feeds into our lives as young people. I like, although I did have a huge interest in politics beforehand, but I wasn't really aware of the minute details of how policy making actually like comes into fruition. But through joining UNICEF, we did get involved in the UNCRC periodic review, which was a great experience in terms of figuring out how, from like a bottom up perspective, how youth voice can be then incorporated into law and then come into practice across the nation and across multiple different countries. So I think definitely having an insight and being involved in the process of policy making and influencing the government for more youth-centered laws was something that I like opened my eyes to once joining the UNICEF.
We're obviously talking about the UK's UNICEF Youth Advisory Board, which feels like a really big organisation and a big topic, but Play Their Way is very much entwined with this and sport and how using children's autonomy can really impact coaches. So from both of your perspectives, why do you think that giving children a voice in a sporting environment is really important?
I think for me personally, through being both a coach myself and also a young person, for the perspective of being a young person, the major thing is it makes you feel safe. It makes you want to keep coming back. And there's nothing more valuable than a group that you feel that you're included in, that you can train together, that you can motivate each other. And through being a coach, you really see that is when you set an environment that young people's voices feel valued, they feel they can have a voice in what you maybe are up to that day, what kind of activities you're going to do inside your session, kind of maybe a day isn't quite how they felt. It was a bit rough at school and they come to their session, they're lacking a bit of motivation. And for them to feel comfortable to come up to you and tell you, hey, is it possible if I could take this set a little bit easier, is so valuable, because it means that you can then be able to empower them and be able to make sure that that session you're looking out for them, they're motivated to keep going. And essentially that week you're able to be that kind of light within their life. You're able to make sure that they are able to train maybe not as efficiently as they do in other weeks, but because you can recognize that they're not feeling their best, that because they felt safe and valued that week, they want to come back, and they'll come back with even more energy, which is so amazing to witness and watch. And for that to happen as well, it means they have trust in you. So when you're setting different session plans and you're working with them, they're able to keep coming back with as much energy and passion. And it means that when you're competing, I remember competing for swimming, and for galas, you're sitting around for, sometimes it can be up to an hour until your race has happened. And we'd all be crowded around playing playing card games, talking. And it was such a social element of my life, which really was so invaluable. And it meant that young people there might be dreaming to go to the Olympics or to race for their country, and others were just there simply to improve their mental health, to have a sport, to have a community that everyone's welcome in. It's super diverse. You had all different age range, different backgrounds, different communities all coming together with one goal in common, and that was to enjoy the sport. And it was certainly challenging as I got older, because the older you got, sometimes like school and academics really overpowered your life. So to be able to make that time for sport and have those coaches that enabled you to maybe not feel the pressure to be coming every day for training, although that was an option in other clubs, instead you could still just come twice a week or 3 times a week, made it such a welcoming environment that meant that I was taking time for my physical health, but also my mental health, which had such an amazing impact on my schoolwork as well, because it meant I was able to study more efficiently and I was able to sit there in class with enough energy to get through the day and to really look forward to something after school that maybe wasn't studying. Instead, it was jumping in a pool or playing netball with my friends or playing a round of cricket, and then all afterwards going to have like a massive kind of banquet together and really enjoy that community and family feel afterwards.
Sam, when it comes to sport, when children and young people have a voice, how much more does that lean into an inclusive environment, do you think, when children can feel that they're being heard?
Yeah, honestly, I think it makes a dramatic impact because it changes essentially our approach to what we're doing. So, for example, there's a difference between like going to a PE lesson for third period versus an after school like netball club. Because I think first of all, you feel like you're taking a role in how everything's being organized, and you're having an active say in what's being done. So, for example, I remember I wasn't normally the type to do lots of sports, but I remember one of my friends who I used to go home with. She did basketball, so then I like essentially tagged along basketball and netball every week in primary school, and then which led on to secondary school. But having had that environment where, we weren't being controlled or we weren't being like, it didn't feel like a top down approach, rather we were, number one, we were having fun, first of all. I think that's a huge priority because I think a lot of the times after school clubs sometimes can feel like, oh, it's just another chore or something else I have to do. But knowing that we were welcomed in space to to be, if we wanted to, we could try being like a team leader, which was really empowering. Or if we wanted to, we could try a different game, or we could do warm-up exercises, and maybe we could lead the warm-up exercises. That was really empowering, knowing that it's, we were there for our own fun as well, not just to be there. So I think the fact that I got involved in maybe an unlikely way kind of motivated me to even get involved in secondary. But had I not had that experience in primary, then I probably wouldn't have gotten involved in secondary. So I think the fact that I was able to go to an environment, which I know I'm very fortunate because I know some of the young people might not feel this way, but the fact I was able to be welcomed in an environment where we could play games together, where, as exactly as Poppy said, we could perhaps have a share a meal after, or like just it gives you a more enriching life in addition to your school life. Yeah, so I think that's having young people like right in the center of how games are played, or how who coaches, or perhaps having like a deputy coach, etc. And having young people lead that is really just makes all the difference to kind of retaining young people in sports outside school.
Obviously, all the guests that we've had so far have been coaches and adults, which makes it sound like I'm not one, but I am, I promise. One of the questions I've asked them a lot is what the barriers to fun and the barriers to play are in formal sporting environments. But probably the best people to ask are young people like yourself. So when you are involved in sport, be that in school, be that outside of school, what do you find the biggest barriers to play are? What are the things that stand in the way of children just enjoying it and play being the first thing that we target in sport?
I think each young person will have different barriers depending on what you're faced, and also for what sport you do as well. And kind of because everyone's lives are so unique, there are always different ones. But some of the key ones that I see come up like so often for me personally is especially this age barrier. Is once you hit, I would say probably your tweens, so around 12 to 13, especially after lockdown for me personally, a lot of young people didn't come back to the sport, um, purely because either academics got too much or because their friends dropped out. And the thing is, once your friend drops out, you suddenly feel that maybe this wasn't a sport for you, and you kind of, and I felt it myself as well, you start to question why you're there. And I was very fortunate to have a coach there that was able to pull me aside, spotted that some of my friends had left, and was able to kind of talk to me about different pathways. So that might be within staying within their group, or also joining a different group that wasn't a competitive one. It wasn't one that was aiming for snags or any other national competition, but instead it was a group that worked together, that we had young people from unis, young people from kind of around 15 to 20 that all came together twice a week and enjoyed the sport. And that was so valuable because giving me that option to see that I could still train with this group, I could take on a leadership role and be able to coach them. But on the other hand, I was able to join another group, which would be one that would be a lot more inclusive for me and best suited, that meant that I was able to still enjoy the sport without feeling that I had to give it up just purely because of my age, and that there wasn't other young people at that stage that weren't wanting to go competitive. So that was so valuable for me. And I think on top of that, sometimes it can be your availability to sport. And for being a young person that was as a female as well, it could make some sports feel very intimidating within my school environment. That it kind of led to this way of trying to create a female only group that was accessible to non-binary and females, that were able to come together and were able to feel safe in this environment, that we could all play basketball as a contact sport. And then what it meant was we were able to really develop our skills. And there was still that option to join a mixed group. But on the other hand, it meant that young people that maybe would have felt intimidated or unsafe to go into those environments was still able to enjoy the sport and value it within like a school community. And we made so many friends out of that. So for me, some key ones are sometimes to do with your gender, and also to do with where you're based, and to do with like your age within that sport. And it's so key that coaches work to try as much as possible to mitigate those effects, to reduce those barriers. But it's always good to acknowledge that they're there as well, and that there's so much room for improvement to work towards, that can happen systematically, but can also happen purely because one young person raises the issue, and then the coach takes their initiative, takes action to look into different ways that you can support individual needs, but can also support groups. Because it tends to be that if one individual is struggling with it, it can impact a lot of young people at the same time.
Sam, one of the things that we've talked about a lot on Play Their Way is giving young people and children a voice. And it's all well and good for us to say to coaches, oh, now's your opportunity, now's the time to do it. But in practice, it's not always that easy. So what would your advice as a young person be to coaches who want to give a voice to young people who they're coaching sports to?
I would say perhaps like even just prior to the sessions, maybe like sending out, asking young people, whether this be through different mediums, through like online surveys or just getting in contact with their parents, etc. Just kind of giving them a questionnaire of what they would like to do this week, or perhaps asking them, what do you think your weaknesses are? What do you think you'd like to improve? And maybe these can be like anonymous surveys, because obviously a lot of young people sometimes won't feel as confident saying things in case they feel like I don't know, they're saying the wrong thing, etc. So maybe I would say in my experience, probably anonymous surveys, or just asking young people after, let's say after a social event, after a sporting event, and you're eating, you're having a meal or whatever you're doing, kind of giving them, number one, fostering a safe environment in which they feel like they can share their opinions with you, because that's a huge thing in terms of the power dynamics and how a young person feels like they can approach their coach, or whether they feel like they even can. So definitely breaking down that power dynamic, and just making things more accessible. So I'd say in terms of explicit steps, probably asking them what they'd like to focus on, and giving opportunities for people to also take leadership roles. I think that's a pivotal thing, because number one, it also instills confidence within themselves, and also you might be attracting young people who might necessarily feel like, oh, I don't know if sports is for me, or I don't know if I have the ability to be in the top team or whatever, but definitely breaking down these barriers as Poppy's mentioned. So definitely asking them from their perspective, having like leadership positions or having team roles would be really empowering, and also what they would like to see, so that they can really shape what's going on in their club from their perspective, as opposed to it being like from an overarching like hierarchy. So definitely those would be my recommendations.
When we talk about self-advocacy and a child-led approach to coaching, I think sometimes coaches think that we mean that children should be leading the sessions. From a young person's perspective, how important is it to just feel like your voice is being heard?
I think in all situations, it's important that your voice is valued. So not even if like another young person's leading the session, but also if it's an adult coach leading the session, that it's so key that young people have people that they know that they can go to. So that could be the coach. It could also be that if you've got like a squad leader, that squad leader is able to take on views and has training behind them, so that then if a young person comes to them with a concern, they know who to get in contact with, they know who to take those concerns to, and in a way that the young person feels that their voice is being kept confidential or safe as well, because it's important to realize that some topics that can come up can be quite hard for a young person to even say in the first place. So it's important to make sure that at all times when they've said that voice, they've spoken out, that they feel safe to do so again if another problem arises. And that when they are doing these sessions and they are having their voice, to have their voice heard, it's really important that not only when it's heard, that coaches value that by acknowledging that they've listened. So that could be by having a conversation with them about where we take this, what's the next steps, or even if it's that they see that change being made within their sessions, because it might be that some suggestions that young people say just aren't able to happen, in which case it's important that the coach goes back to that young person and speaks to them about why that is and what adjustments can be made, though, to make sure that that young person feels safe and feels that their voice, when they raised it, was valuable. So instead of being listened to but still not seeing any change happening, they know where they're at, they know what's happening, and they're involved in all discussions. And as well as that, what sometimes worked in some groups as well is by having a group that help plan different fun sessions as well. So not only do sometimes some competitive squadrons have very rigid and very tiring and sometimes quite soul draining practices that go on, it's important that young people are able to speak out when that's getting too much, when they are getting too overwhelmed, and that when they do speak out, that their voice is valued, change is made, and on top of that, they're able to have fun, because that's the main thing of sport. It's to have fun, it's to get involved with friends, it's to socialize. It's not really always about trying to reach the Olympics or trying to reach nationals. Instead, it's something that can come with having fun. Is if you are having fun, you're attending training, you're enjoying it, and you want to be there, you'll see in yourself this development. You'll see not only your mental health improving, but the times that you get, especially in swimming, your PBs will start to emerge. You'll get different personal bests, and that all comes from having fun and wanting to be at training. And you see that as a coach as well. You see that if the young person wants to be there, they'll tend to come so much more, train harder, and reach new goals. That having those goals in swimming and having different competitions that you enter at different levels means that a young person has something they work towards, they strive towards, and being able to do that in different leagues as well. So you have novice leagues, you have different ones depending on the young person, what they want to try and reach towards, what's ambitious for them, means that every step of the way they feel that they've got something to work towards alongside their coach, and having that discussion with their coach on which way they go means that the coach is able to support them as best they can, rather than guessing, because it tends to be that if you guess what a young person needs, you can very easily misjudge what they need, and that can cause some very devastating impacts, especially for that child. So to make sure that their voice is heard every step of the way kind of mitigates those risks, and make sure that that young person can excel within the sport, enjoy it, and continue to thrive.
Sam, as someone who's been given a voice in quite a formal way by UNICEF's Youth Board, what would be your advice to young people who are lacking confidence in getting their voice out?
That's a really important question, very important question, because confidence is really important when you're, trying to have your voice championed. So I would say, first of all, just accepting the value that your voice has. So, for example, I remember when I was younger, I didn't really have that much confidence. I guess the first time I really had confidence, I guess, would someone say, was when I joined the first school council in my school. And even in that, it's a huge step to apply, let alone to actually be put into a position. So I'd say definitely valuing your voice and knowing the impact that your voice can have and seeing it come to fruition and um, seeing like the different steps in which your voice can be taken like seriously. So I don't know. I think it's also on the part of adults to help young people find their confidence. Because there's only so much we can do by ourselves, but also having an adult or a teacher or whoever that may be, or like a mentor, kind of affirm what you're doing and affirm like, oh, I saw that you volunteered to join that team today. Like that was a really good step. So kind of just for small things, just acknowledging their efforts, acknowledging that like, oh, normally they don't really put their hands up or they don't really try to initiate games. So let me just let them know that I've seen what they've done, I've acknowledged what they've done, and I think that really goes a long way in the long term. Because, for example, I remember even though I wasn't the best at netball, just for one time when I did manage to get like a goal, I guess, the coach kind of was like, "Oh, you did really well today. Like, just keep on doing what you're doing, and like just remember, like, just giving advice, but also in a very constructive way, not in a demeaning way, but definitely." I'd say what goes the longest way is acknowledging young people and children's kind of their effort to improve themselves and their effort to become better in these spaces, because that might be the make or break of a young child coming to the next session. If they feel like, oh, no one really acknowledged that I put in any effort, or no one really heard me, then that they might not come to the next um, coaching. So I think definitely acknowledging that, but also fostering a community in which young people can empower themselves, as in empower like their team members, or say, hey, you did like really well today. So definitely fostering an environment that isn't like too like badly competitive, if that makes sense. So that young people don't feel like, oh, there's no point in me being this team because I'm not adding to the team value. But although it is important to have competitiveness in these circumstances, it is really important that that doesn't outweigh the community value and the ethos of fostering an inclusive environment. So definitely, I'd say just the small stuff in different areas. So within the young people themselves and their groups, but also just acknowledging things from the coach's perspective.
Girls, thank you so much for an amazing conversation today. It's been very enlightening on my part, and I hope everybody at home has really enjoyed listening. Be sure to leave us a review and share this with someone else who you think might like it too. Check out our website, www.playtheirway.org, and follow Play Their Way on social media at Play Their Way on TikTok, X, and LinkedIn, and at Play Their Way UK on Facebook and Instagram.